Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The Front Range drew a hard violet line against the evening when my phone quivered on the arm of the couch. A WhatsApp bubble slid up the screen with my son's name, Miles, and a tiny triangle waiting to be pressed. I was in the living room of my old Craftsman, a narrow house on a quiet Denver block, where the furnace clanked when it woke and the windows let in the dry smell of snow even before the first flake fell. I had a mug of peppermint tea cooling beside the remote, and the last of the sun lay like a brass ruler across the hardwood floor. I pressed play. His voice when it came sounded ironed flat, then snapped in two. "I wish you weren't my mother. You're useless." The words weren't shouted. They were worse than that, tidy, deliberate, like a bill placed face up on a table. The audio ended with the soft rasp of him breathing. For a second, I thought the message had cut off too soon. For another second, I pretended I hadn't heard it. My thumb moved before my lungs did. I called back. The ringtone pinwheeled, then a recorded baritone said the number didn't accept calls. I tried again, the same voice. I typed a short question, then watched the gray check marks harden into silence. Blocked. The house made its own reply, one board settling somewhere toward the kitchen. The furnace taking a breath, and I sat very still as if motion might break the thin glass that kept the evening from spilling. On the mantel, the clock my father gave us for a wedding present kept at it, insistent and small. The hands marched without looking up. The room was familiar in that unfriendly way, every picture frame exactly where I dusted it, every nail doing its job. I looked at the one in the middle, the photo of Miles at 17, wearing a thrift store blazer, jaw set, like he'd swallowed a star and was holding the shine in his cheeks by force. I remembered the light that day, how it came through the cottonwood leaves out front, and made it look like luck had a texture. My hand found the armrest as if it were a rung on a ladder in the dark. I had to breathe on purpose. I tasted mint and the faint rubber of the phone case. Outside, a bus grumbled along Colfax, a few blocks over, the kind of evening route that holds people up and puts them down, and does not ask questions in between. I thought of driving to Miles's apartment, of knocking until the porch light snapped awake and some other door opened, not his. I stood and crossed to the kitchen on the old pine boards that know where I'm headed. The kettle on the stove was still warm, so I poured a little water to chase heat into the mug. When I turned back, the living room had gone from brass to pewter. I set the phone down on the counter face up, then flipped it over and flattened my palm on it anyway, like it could feel I was there. All those nights came in, then not like a parade, but like weather the ER at Denver Health after a pileup on I-25, the sour tang of saline, the white of the nurse's sneakers, when everything else was red. The time the heat went out in February and I kept the oven going with the door cracked Miles at the table, doing math by the light of a camping lantern. The silver wedding band I sold one summer to make a late tuition payment when he wanted the extra algebra course because it makes the rest of it make sense, Mom. I could still feel the rings circle on my finger sometimes, a ghost pressure that knew how to return at inconvenient hours. I walked to the sink and turned the cold on. The pipes coughed and gave me the Rocky Mountain taste of metal and stone, and I drank from my hands like I had just come in from the yard. The water steadied me enough to name the tremor beneath my ribs, not just hurt. Certainty, too, the heavy kind you don't say out loud yet. The certainty that a line had been crossed while my eyes were on something else. I had thought I was building shelter. I hadn't counted the ways shelter can also become shade. That thought embarrassed me. The word useless tried to stick to it the way burrs fasten to socks, but I pulled it off and set it on the counter with the phone. I wanted to despise him for the efficiency of his cruelty, and I couldn't. The want and the failure hung together, a badly built mobile twisting on invisible thread. The heater came up with a long rattle. I left the kitchen light off and let the street glow do its thin work. I could map the house by sound, the faint hum over the refrigerator, a neighbor shutting a car door, the muffled hiss of tires on the next block. I went back to the couch, slid into the dent my body knows, and finally let myself think about the words themselves, the way they'd been shaped. Tidy, deliberate, practiced. It occurred to me that this message was not new to him. Maybe it was the first time he'd sent it to me. Maybe he'd been rehearsing it out loud to other people for months. The idea made my skin prickle. I tried to follow it to a source and met only air. A blue LED glinted from the router near the TV. I watched it blink until my eyes blurred. Somewhere between one blink and another, a memory rose with too much clarity the night Miles was 5 and had the flu. How I counted breaths while he slept across my lap. How the fever broke and left him damp and light as a bird. I had not known there were jobs harder than that. I had not known that breath counting could have this many forms. The phone lit up again with nothing on it, just a system notification I did not read. I thought of the things I could do and did not list them. I waited. Waiting, it turned out, has a sound the house shifting into its colder hour. A drip somewhere in the bathroom that would be a chore tomorrow, the bus again. I took the photo from the mantel and held it at my chest. 17-year-old Miles did not answer the question I had not asked. The edges of the frame pressed crescent moons into my palms, and I liked the hurt of it. It stayed. It was mine. I put the picture back, made myself look at every inhabitant of the mantel, a sprig of dried sage in a tumbler, a library receipt. I had meant to toss the clock with its dutiful hands, and then I picked up the phone and opened the message again. I listened twice. I listened a third time. The words did not change. What changed was the part of me that let them in. The first time they landed like a verdict. The third time they were only evidence. I set the phone down softly as if it were sleeping. The last of the light left the floor. I turned on the lamp by the couch, and the room sprang into its other shape, smaller, warmer, outlined with the ordinary. My breathing found its rhythm. The mint in the mug had gone bitter with time, and I drank it anyway. The clock said 6:48 and then 6:49. I wiped the ring of the mug from the table with the heel of my hand. In the quiet that followed, I felt something move inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something like a stake set in firm ground. I did not give it a name. I only sat very still and let it hold. The lamp by the couch left a soft ellipse on the rug. I shut it off, put on the wool coat that still kept the shape of my shoulders, and took my keys from the hook by the door. The air on the porch had that front-range bite, clean and metallic, the kind that makes your teeth feel recently brushed. I locked up and walked toward Colfax because moving forward was simpler than standing still. Traffic hummed like a long zipper. Neon smeared in puddles left by a half-hearted flurry. A man pushed a grocery cart full of plastic bottles and talked to someone I couldn't see. I passed the mural of a horse made of lightning and stopped where the block bent inward under a scrim of pink light, the neon horse. The sign flickered once and held. Inside, the heat was loud and the air citrus clean the way bars try to smell like anything but last night. A single bartender worked the long plank, a woman whose gray hair was pulled into a stringer's ponytail. She moved like a person who knew where everything lived. I took a stool with a split in the cushion and ordered soda water with lime. When she set it in front of me, I slid a photo from my wallet onto the napkin. Not the one from the mantel. This was him at 20, beard trying to happen, eyes too bright. Do you recognize him? I kept my voice even, as if I were asking for a street. She looked once, then again. Her mouth clicked to one side the way people's do when they're walking back through a hallway of memory. Comes in with a little parade, she said finally. 2 or 3 boys who think the night owes them more than it does. She tapped the photo with a knuckle. He's got a line. Says he's got a card at home that never declines. The lime in my glass smelled like a grocery store's produce aisle in July, whose card I asked not a question so much as a locating device. She considered me. He doesn't say Mom, she said, but he says it like the weather just there, something that covers him. Last week he flashed a bar tab like a diploma. You want me to tell him something if he comes in? No, I said. Thank you for the soda. I left a tip too large for the drink and stepped back into the cold. The neon made the sidewalk look like a second sky underfoot. I walked without planning to the bus stop at York, watched a bus exhale and take on 3 riders and let it go. A dog barked in the trailer lot across the street. I turned north and cut toward the river, then over to a skinny brick building where Launchbox, the co-working space, kept its front desk staffed by a rotating chorus of extroverts. The lobby had succulents in white cylinders and a bulletin board selling what people sell when they're trying to be born. A young man in a hoodie that had never seen a gym looked up from his laptop. Evening. Tours are by appointment, he said, like a sign that had learned to talk. I'm not here for a membership, I said. I'm looking for someone who sometimes meets clients here. Miles. I put the same photo on the counter. He says he runs a startup. Hoodie's eyes did the half squint of recognition. Right, he said, drawing the word out. The pitch deck guy. He schedules the glass conference room to host interviews, then tells folks he needs relocation funds to bridge them to a salary once the round closes. He looked at the photo again. Round never closes. He pay his room fees. On time mostly, he said. Sometimes he asks if we can run it a few days late because the wire is in the air. He did finger quotes without shame. Is he in trouble? I don't know, I said, and it was the cleanest answer available. I tucked the photo away, thanked him, and stepped back out to the thin winter dark. I let my feet find the light. They took me to Cherry Creek, where windows throw money at the street. In a sneaker store with displays like small altars, 2 clerks were trading ship dates the way stagehands trade cues. I placed a palm on the glass above a serious pair of shoes and waited until the taller of the 2 noticed that I was not there to look expensive. Can I help you find a size, he asked, professional bright. I'm looking for a name, I said, and the photo did its job again. He gave a low whistle like someone remembering a joke. That guy, he said, talks a lot, says his investors are hands-on, says his home investor likes to fuel velocity. He made the phrase sound as ridiculous as it was. He likes the limited drops and says he puts them on the account later. We don't run tabs. Did he buy those? I nodded at the altar shoes. No, the clerk said. Took pictures. I told him the pictures don't lace. He shrugged. You want me to write down what he ordered last time he actually paid? That's not necessary, I said. Outside, the wind had picked up and the lights were beginning to mean different things. I went home by a different route because that's what people do when they've learned something and can't yet say what it is. The house had kept itself alive in my absence. The furnace made a new rattle to show me it wasn't done. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop and the fat blue folder that holds life deeds, titles, receipts with carbon breath. I took out the paper for the 2018 Toyota Tacoma, the one I had in a moment that felt like common sense at the time, titled to myself, when I co-signed the loan. I took out the deed for the basement duplex in 5 points the copy, with my name printed in a font that doesn't care who you are. I dialed Patrick Ochoa. We'd met when I needed a durable power of attorney before a surgery I ended up not needing. He was the kind of lawyer who called on holidays to ask how the stitches were doing. The phone rang a clean daytime number of times and then got him. Nora, he said, and his voice had a baritone's floor. What can I do? I didn't rehearse. I gave him the short, true version, 1 message, 3 stops, the sudden shape of a pattern. I named the assets I had papers for without saying the word assets. He listened without stitching his words into mine. The truck's in your name alone, he said when I paused. Yes, and the deed, also mine. He let the air between us be air for a second. Okay, he said. If you want to change who has their hands on these, there are ways to do that don't require anybody else's permission. I looked at the title at the part where my name was written in blue when the rest was black. I want to move them, I said. Start with the truck, he said, efficient but not brisk. You can consign it or sell it outright. I can send you a form for immediate transfer to a dealer that will pick up. As for the property, I'll email you a standard engagement for appraisal and preliminary listing. You can stop at appraisal if you change your mind. But you don't sound like someone who is practicing. I didn't answer that. I stared at my own hands, surprised by how steady they were, and gave him the email addresses I still use because no one has ever pried them out of me. While we were on the phone, the forms arrived like obedient birds. He told me where to sign, and the software drew my signature with a fountain pen I couldn't own. Upload scans of the titles, he said. I'll tag a notary if anything needs ink. We hung up without ceremony. The kitchen light turned the table into a stage for paper. I scanned the truck title and the deed and sent them into the tunnel. I signed the consignment agreement for Summit Toyota's pickup program and chose a time block. The system offered me morning, noon, or late afternoon. I clicked late afternoon because that is when departures look like decisions and not escapes. I found the spare Tacoma key in the drawer with the rubber bands and folded grocery bags and put it on the table like a silver fish. I took the file with service records and clipped it with the title copy in a manila folder because order is a kindness I can still control. The house watched me approving or indifferent, I couldn't tell. I made tea I didn't need. It warmed my hands while the rest of me settled around a center I hadn't known was there. Emails stacked politely. Summit confirmed the tow. Patrick confirmed receipt. An appraiser whose name looked like a Scandinavian winter offered 2 time slots for a walkthrough and asked if the basement unit was occupied. I typed a neutral answer about access and clicked send. If I had expected drama, I had given it nowhere to land. The ordinary kept happening, a neighbor's screen door popping a siren, distant enough to be a memory, the water heater marching toward its next cycle. When the tow truck arrived, a low diesel murmur at the curb, I took the folder and the key outside. The driver was younger than anyone should be at that hour's competence. He checked the VIN against my paperwork, lifted the Tacoma by geometry, and cinched it with a ratchet that sang a rough metal hymn. You want the plate off? He asked. Yes, I said, and he handed it to me warm from his hand. I held the blank rectangle like a piece of attic light. He gave me a clipboard and a pen whose ink fought the cold. I signed where he pointed. The Tacoma lowered its front end toward him the way a good horse does when someone knows how to ask. When he pulled away, the curb remembered its own shape. The tire tracks looked like lines on a palm. I stood with the plate and the folder until my fingers told me I was making a small mistake in temperature management. Inside, I set the plate on the table and waited for my breath to slow. It did. I walked to the hallway mirror and saw a woman whose mouth had decided something without needing to say it. I went back to the kitchen and shut the laptop. Paper rustled into the folder like birds settling. I wiped a small ring of water that had appeared under the tea mug and threw the damp paper towel away. The house was identical to the one I had left a few hours earlier. Every object occupied its old square of air. Somewhere in the basement, the boiler ticked to itself. I placed the Tacoma key on top of the folder and pressed my palm there until heat went through metal into paper and back. Then I took my hand away. The room held still. The room held still long enough for my pulse to learn the new tempo. Then the phone shivered on the table, an unfamiliar number, local, the kind that belongs to a borrowed device or a pay-by-the-month. I answered. "It's gone," Miles said, breath snapping at the edges of the words. "The truck. Did you take it? They said some dealer summit picked it up. What are you doing?" "I authorized a pickup," I said. The voice that came out of me was the one I used in exam bays when the noise wanted to be the boss. The title is in my name. "You can't." The word thudded and then the sentence skidded. "That's my transportation. I have meetings. He groped for a noun that might scare me into reversing time. "Obligations." "What have you built with it?" I asked. The silence on his end was the kind that includes a ceiling and a light bulb. When sound returned, it had new teeth. "You're sabotaging me. You want me to fail so you can feel important." "I'm not in your meetings," I said. I changed access to things that are mine. Something clattered near his mouth keys, a clip a door he should not have slammed. "I'm coming for the duplex," he said. "You don't even live there. I need the downstairs. I've got someone lined up to sublet." "There will be an appraisal," I said. "A walkthrough is scheduled." "Are you serious?" The laugh was small and mean. "You think people will show up for that and not see what you're doing?" "I'll tell them." "You can tell them," I said. "My name is on the deed." "You're not listening," he said, and the edge was a boy's acute and feverish. "I've got pressure. I need runway." "I heard your message," I said. "I heard you say I'm useless." He breathed in like someone about to dive. "I didn't mean—" "You did." I said not unkindly, "If you want to talk about logistics, we can do that in a public place during the day when voices know how to behave. I won't be paying for anything. If you need resources, there are places that don't have my face." "You can't be like this," he said, "and then you're not this person." "I am," I said. The line went thin. He hung up, or the phone did it for him. I set mine down and felt the shape of the table under my hand, the familiar topography of the wood's old wounds. I texted Rochelle and Gloria and DeAndre and asked if they could come by for coffee in the morning. I did not say why. The group text blinked itself into agreement the way family does when habit is stronger than curiosity. I slept badly and lightly and woke to a kitchen turned west by winter light. I baked cornbread because measuring and heat cooperate in ways people sometimes don't. They came in coats that held the outside air like a second person. Rochelle kissed both my cheeks and set a grocery bag on the counter. Cream berries, a carton of eggs, as if breakfast were a problem that could be solved with more breakfast. Gloria shook snow from her scarf and argued with the mat about whether it should keep it. D'Andre carried himself careful as if the kitchen were a stage and he belonged to the backstage union. "What's wrong?" Rochelle asked, before coats were fully off because she was built to go straight to the broken thing with tape in a hand. I poured coffee and put the cornbread on a wooden board like it had an appointment. "I'm going to play you a message," I said. I set my phone on the table and pressed the triangle. Miles's voice was not a surprise to me. To them, it arrived like a stranger in their car already buckled. Gloria's jaw stayed open after the words ended as if the next ones were cued and then canceled. "He didn't," she said, but it was the past tense that knew it was outnumbered. Rochelle smoothed her napkin into quarters and then smaller quarters. "He's under pressure," she said carefully, as if the sentence might break if rushed. "Sometimes people say things. He's a good kid." I broke the cornbread crust with the back of a knife. Steam climbed and smelled like a county fair's best day. "He called about the truck," I said. "It belonged to me. It's with a dealer now. The duplex will be appraised." D'Andre sipped his coffee like it might reveal a card if treated well. He set the cup down, wiped the ring his cup left with the side of his hand, and spoke to the table. "He asked me for $400 in last month," he said. "Said it was a deposit for a contractor. I told him I could do the work for free. He said it wasn't that kind of contractor. He looked up at me with a face built to apologize. I gave it to him." Gloria's scarf made a dark loop on the back of her chair. "He told me the bank put a hold on his check," she said, voice low. "Said if he didn't put down cash that day, he'd lose a client. I've worked cash registers since cash was a thing. I know a hold when I see it." She pressed her lips together. "He didn't pay me back yet." Rochelle didn't speak. She cut a square of cornbread and put it on her plate and didn't look at it. "He asked for my card," she said finally. "Said he needed to book a flight and his was maxed because the airline pre-authorizes and it would fall off. I told him no. He called me controlling." She exhaled through her nose, small and exact. "I told him yes then." I gave him the card. I watched the charge. It wasn't an airline. We sat there, the four of us, with our coffee and our small steam in the way truth fills a room without asking permission. The kitchen, which had held so many versions of what a day could be, put its shoulder under the weight like a good house does. I'm not a vault, I said. I won't be the place where he hides from what things cost. Gloria reached across and covered my hand with hers, palm cool from the outside air it hadn't finished letting go. You don't have to explain, she said. Rochelle's eyes went glassy and then clear. She nodded once as if someone had given her a fact she could live with. Okay, she said. The bell rang, then a single polite strike from a hand that knew this door. I opened it to find a kid I didn't know holding an envelope with my name and Miles's slanted ambition. He asked me to drop this, the kid said, shoulders making apologetic rolls under a puffer jacket. Said not to wait. Thank you, I said, and the kid vanished back into the day like a message sent without read receipts. I did not open the envelope in the doorway. I brought it to the table and slid a butter knife through the flap like I was cutting a ribbon at a ceremony no one wanted. The paper inside was dense words, stacked and eager, the ink a little heavier where his hand had pressed to prove a point. He apologized in a paragraph that knew how to twist. He provided context until context begged to be let out. He said he was reflecting deeply on patterns. He said he understood the harm. He said going forward as if the phrase could lay rails. I read every word. I turned the letter over as if it might have a second message printed on the back in an ink that needed air. I folded it back along its crease and slid it into the envelope and put the envelope back on the table. Rochelle opened her hands, palms up, empty. What are you going to say? I tore a sheet from the pad that lives by the phone because paper makes intentions behave. I wrote with the grocery aisle pen that always works. Reflection isn't reform. When actions do the talking, I'll be ready to listen. No threats, no list of hoops. I folded the note and addressed the envelope to Miles in the same hand I used to write excuse notes for school. I set it by the fruit bowl next to an apple with a bruise it didn't deserve. Gloria cleared plates without asking, because she knows the grammar of my house. DeAndre took the trash outside and came back with cold on his coat that reminded us the day was still happening. Rochelle hugged me in a way that didn't use up either of us. They left piece by piece, the door doing its polite work. The appraiser came and went in the afternoon with a clipboard and shoes that never squeaked. He walked the basement and said words to his measuring laser, and I heard none of them. After he left the space, remembered it had been mine a long time, then decided to be a room again. Near dark, the unfamiliar number reappeared. I answered because not answering is its own noise. He didn't start with hello. So this is where we are, he said. Background shuffled on his end, the whoosh of a heavy door, a TV talking to itself in a nearby room, the click of a vending machine deciding on a soda. I'm at the Mile High Lodge, he said, daring me to know at the weekly rate off the highway, where the ice machine wears a necklace of caution tape. I've got a week paid. He let the sentence hang so the math would hit me with the force he intended. Okay, I said. This is humiliating, he said, the word dragging across gravel. Everything smells like bleach. The towels are gray. There's a bus, but it runs when it wants. You really don't care. I care, I said. I'm not paying. He laughed a short bark. Of course. Of course. So this is what, some kind of lesson. It's a week, I said. You said so. A long inhale traveled the line. I got a night shift, he said, finally, voice lowered because pride hates fluorescent light. Somewhere behind him a forklift whined its reverse hymn. Distribution center off Quebec. It's not... He stopped the sentence before the word he would not let himself say. I hope your shoes are good, I said. I'll send you the letter I wrote, he said. Read it. I did, I said. There's a note on the table for you. He breathed once in and out. Okay, he said, and the word was the size of a thumbprint. Okay. The line died in a clean way. I put the phone in the drawer with the rubber bands closed. It opened it again, took the phone back out. I carried the envelope to the porch and wedged it under the top mat, where the edge would show. The cold met my face and did its brisk work. Across the street, a man in a yellow beanie walked a dog that stopped and considered every tree, as if the day's history were written in bark. Inside, the light in the hallway went to honey as the sun found its late angle. I poured water into a glass and drank it standing up, then rinsed the glass and set it upside down to dry. On the counter, the plate from the tow truck rested like a punctuation mark I hadn't yet chosen. I slid it into the closet with the snow shovels where useful things wait without complaint. Close to midnight, Dondre texted a blurry photo that caught Miles in a fluorescent aisle pushing a pallet jack head down. No caption. I looked at it long enough for the pixels to stop being pixels. I didn't text back. I turned off the kitchen light and let the house find its night shape around me. In bed, the window let in a small square of Denver. One star, one airplane pretending to be one, and the front range wind that always remembers to come home. I listened to it count itself against the eaves until my body agreed to be quiet. The envelope on the porch waited for whatever feet would find it. The heater breathed. The clock moved without asking permission. The night did what nights do. By morning, the mat on the porch showed a neat diagonal where a shoe had lifted it. The envelope was gone. Frost scalloped the edges of the steps and made the railing a cold instrument under my palm. Inside the kitchen held the night's quiet as if it were a folded sheet. I took the early bus to the credit union because the first appointment of the day belongs to people who mean it. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaned yesterday and coffee brewed an hour too long. A small tree in the corner wore dust like tinsel. Tegan, my advisor, had a voice that curved around S's and a row of pens lined up by height. "We talked last year about smoothing income," she said, tapping a screen that reflected me in hard angles. "Fixed annuity for the baseline low-cost index fund for growth. You said you weren't ready." "I am now," I said. "We did the slow work." She explained caps and floors. I asked the same question twice and let her answer it twice because the second time made more sense than pride. We built a ladder out of years and interest. She printed forms that smelled faintly of factory. I initialed boxes that asked if I knew the difference between wanting and needing. We set the transfer from my checking to the new account small and steady, the kind of motion that outlasts noise. When she slid the copies across the desk, my name looked complete in a way it hadn't last week. "Beneficiary," Tegan asked. "I'll put that in writing later," I said, and she nodded without making it a problem. Outside Colfax wore its weekday-faced delivery trucks, men in neon vests, the sky pretending it had decided on a color. I stood on the curb long enough to feel the street find its rhythm under my shoes, and then called Patrick. "The appraisal's back," he said. "Numbers are solid. Market's thinner in January, but not thin. I've drafted a listing agreement that gives you air and time." "Send it," I said. "We'll keep it plain." "You want occupancy language?" he asked. "Showings by appointment only with owner present." "Yes." "All right." Paper made its quiet noises on his end. "And Nora, if anyone tells a story about who holds what, send them to me." The email landed while we were still on the phone. I signed and watched the signature etch itself in blue, where the world only needed black. He thanked me in a way that didn't spend words. On the way home, I stepped off the bus early and cut down Santa Fe Drive, where galleries keep their faces pressed to the glass even when no one is looking in. A narrow shop had a tray of hammered cuffs in the window, crescent moons of metal laid out like phases. Inside, a woman with silver hair and a leather apron polished a chain with a cloth that had been washing the same light for years. "I'm looking for something plain," I said, with room for 6 words. She ran a finger over a row of bracelets and plucked one that had a little weight, the kind that answers your wrist when you move. "Sterling," she said. "Takes an honest line." At the workbench, she stamped the letters with a rhythm that made the metal speak quietly to itself, line in the sand. The words sat there without arguing. When she fitted the cuff to my wrist, the cool of it convinced the skin beneath to wake up. "Good fit," she said. "It is," I said, and paid with bills I had counted before I left the house. Outside, the wind shifted and the cuff warmed under the coat as if it belonged. At home, the mailbox held 3 envelopes. Summit's intake confirmation for the Tacoma, a credit union brochure about timelines that didn't brag, and a flyer for a Community College of Denver open house. I set the first 2 in the blue folder. The flyer I turned over in my hands and dialed the number at the bottom. The college connected me to the foundation in a building that used to be a bank. On the 3rd floor, a woman named Marisol Bernal wore a cardigan the color of wet clay and had a laugh that found its footing quickly. "You want to set up a fund for EMT students?" she asked, eyebrows up as if a window had opened. "Books and boots," I said. "First semester, no essays. Instructors choose who needs it." Quietly. She pulled out a form that had a box for everything except what makes people run. "We can start small," she said. "Mim." I hesitated long enough to see the ceiling tiles, tiny holes in perfect rows. "Call it the Callahan EMT bookshelf," I said. "I'm not putting my first name on it." She smiled like she'd been waiting for something modest. We worked through the legal sentences that keep kindness from getting tangled. When it was time to fund it, I wrote the check with the slap of certainty that comes from practicing your own name. "Would you like to meet a class?" Marisol asked. "If they're between lessons," I said. The EMT lab smelled like rubber and bleach and the plastic approximation of skin. Mannequins lay open to the air. A young instructor with forearms the size of rope lit up when Marisol explained. He introduced me without adjectives. The students nodded like people who have been tired before. A girl with a braid down her back said her boots split last week and duct tape was a temporary solution that didn't like snow. A boy with freckles told me he sleeps in his car after the late shift and showers at the YMCA by the stadium. Their sentences were like the work they were learning, short, precise, no room for decoration. "You'll get a letter," Marisol told them. No event. Just a letter and a receipt from the bookstore. On my way out, I passed a bulletin board of lost and found items, a single glove, a water bottle, a lanyard with no keys. I left a note with the foundation office that said donations could come without my approval if they were meant for this shelf, and this shelf only. Marisol folded it into her files like it belonged. The day had a clean seam down the middle when I stepped back outside. The light had gone brighter without asking permission. I walked the long way home and stopped at the rec center, where a flyer for Saturday photography basics curled on a corkboard. The class door stood open. 8 people arranged themselves around a folding table. The instructor, a woman with camera straps, like seatbelts, talked about aperture while showing a photo of steam climbing from a cup. Light is habit, she said. I sat in the back and paid cash for the drop-in because it was simpler than telling a story. We photographed ordinary things on purpose, a stack of chairs, a window blind the crease where wall meets ceiling. My hands learned the weight of the borrowed camera. When I framed the radiator in the rec center hallway, the rising heat blurred into a small weather I could see. It felt like counting breaths in an ER and finding them only air and light, no alarms. By late afternoon, the house had that gentle volume it keeps when a day has been used well. The cuff found its place on the dish by the keys. I wiped the counter the way you do when there isn't much to wipe, and that's the point. The listing for the duplex went live without drama. Patrick sent a link that I opened and closed the way you nod to a thing and let it proceed. A text came in from an unknown number that now had a name made it through Shift. The words wore their boots. I typed, got it, and put the phone face down. The clock on the mantel shouldered itself forward. I filled a glass with water and felt the cold of it from palm to elbow. The furnace exhaled, and the house loosened its shoulders. In the living room, the photo of 17-year-old Miles stood in the same place it has always stood. I dusted the frame with the edge of my sleeve, not to bless it, only to see it clearly. The cuff on my wrist caught the lamp and threw a line of light across the table. I let it sit there, a quiet mark on the wood already marked, then turned the lamp off and listened to the room settle around the new shape of things. The cuff left a pale line on the table where the lamp had struck it, then the room let the light go. Morning brought the sound of the mail slot flicking and the small thud of paper finding the floor. The listing drew appointments without fuss, stacked emails from Patrick's office with tidy blocks of time. I swept the basement steps and changed a bulb that had been pretending to work. The first showing was a nurse with a stroller and a laugh that kept trying to happen. She held her baby the way people hold things they plan to keep. The second was a graduate student whose backpack had permanent weight. He tapped on the basement window to hear what kind of street lived outside. The third wore a paramedic jacket and looked at the corners like corners had secrets. He thumped a wall with his knuckles and nodded at what it told him. I let them walk in silence and named the necessary facts when the rooms asked. The dryer rattled like a coin jar. I wrote belt on a square of paper and taped it above the hookups. In their wake, the air smoothed back to itself. I closed the door at the bottom of the stairs and stood there long enough to hear the house remember where its edges were. Footsteps upstairs, only mine. Texts from an unknown number that was no longer unknown came early and late. Shift ran long. Bus missed me. Got a ride. Sometimes only a photo, a sandwich in its wrapper sitting on a steel table. The beige square of a motel towel. A palm with a red line where a box had kissed it too hard. I answered as if we were relaying information across a ravine. Received. Okay. Ice it. Snow arrived in one clean sentence and stayed to edit. The porch steps traded wood for white. I salted and knocked the clumps from the shovel on the stoop, a winter rhythm I never forgot. On the third morning after the listing went live, a text, coffee lunch, a location followed a diner off Quebec that tolerated fluorescent light and long coats, the kind of place where fries come in a paper boat and the ketchup bottle has lost its label. I went because the hour was noon and the rules were mine. He was already there, hands in the pockets of a jacket that tried to be black and had given up in places. He had the stillness of someone who had taught their body not to fidget because timekeepers were watching. I recognized the shoes from DeAndre's photo, the leather learning the shape of work. Hi, Mom, he said. The word landed without a flourish. Hi, Miles, I said. We took a booth where the window fogged at the corners. The server poured coffee that tasted like heat and generosity. We did the small business of menus and decided on breakfast because breakfast at noon keeps faith. He didn't touch the sugar packets. They moved me to daze, he said, testing the sentence for wobble and finding none. 5 to 1, sometimes 2. The manager said I show up and don't ask questions. That's a valuable trick, I said, and the server slid plates between us, eggs, shining toast, doing its rectangular best. He worked at a piece of toast like it had something to say. I got a place, he said. Month to month, small, off Oneida. It smells like someone else used to smoke there. I opened the windows. He chewed. Bus line is close. I took my time with the butter because patience behaves better when your hands are doing something. Do you have a bed? A futon, he said. Found it on a curb. Cleaned it. It's fine. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the formica between our plates, a flat brass key with blue nail polish on the top, my old code for basement versus upstairs. It left a dark comma on the table where the last person's hand had not been dry. I used the laundry once last month, he said. I didn't ask. I knew where the wrench was when the hose coughed. I'm sorry. I slid the key into my palm. The metal had kept all the hands it had known. Mine was only adding another layer. I put it in my coat pocket without making it ceremonial. Thank you, I said. He breathed out through his nose and watched the steam from the coffee tilt. "I read your note," he said. "I keep hearing it." I drank and said nothing. Words are cheaper than the heat they make. I let the heat do the talking. He looked at me, then the way kids look at road signs when they've been driving too long and need permission to believe they're close. "I'm not going to ask you for money," he said, and nobody around us flinched. He wiped his mouth with the side of his hand like a teenager who had forgotten napkins exist. "I invited you," I said when the check came. He let me pick it up. The bills from my wallet behaved flat and brave. When we stood, he reached for a hug and then changed it to something like standing near a hug. I put a hand on his shoulder because that fits in public. Outside, the air had the clean sting of the day after snow when everything pretends to be new. He put his hands back in his pockets and looked at the sky as if it owed him nothing. "You warm enough?" I asked, and he nodded like a person who had revised his idea of warm. "Thanks for lunch," he said. "You're welcome," I said. We separated without ceremony, each to our own block of weather. On the bus home, I watched a man sleep with his mouth open and a woman knit with her eyes on the window. The cuff sat quiet against my wrist under the sleeve, a small awake weight. At my stop, the driver flicked the lever that pops the back door and gave me the nod that belongs to people who ride often. The mailbox offered a slim envelope with the community college's return address. Inside was a stack of carbon copies that had learned to be fancy, a ledger of purchases from the bookstore EMT Techs, and a second list of boots with sizes ranging down to small then smaller. A handwritten note from Marisol was clipped to the top, receipts enclosed. Students notified, no signature flourish, only her name. I put the papers in the blue folder and slid the folder into the drawer where order lives. The kitchen clock kept the hour as if hours were grateful to be kept. I stood at the sink and looked through the window at the street that had chosen us both, my house and me, a long time ago. A kid dragged a sled that never fully lifted. His father pretended not to notice the effort so the kid could finish. Afternoon found its lower gear. Rochelle called to ask if I needed anything from the store. I said no and heard her breath settle into the ease of a question answered simply. Gloria texted a photo of a pot of soup the color of patience. I set my phone face down after thank you and let the countertop have the last word. Near dusk, a message from Miles got the day shift permanent. "Manager says 2 raises this year if hours stay clean." I typed noted and set the phone beside the cuff. No confetti, no sermon. The radiator in the living room clicked once like a polite throat. I pulled on boots and went out to brush the porch. The broom made a stripe through powdered sugar and wood remembered its own smell. The light above the door hummed itself awake. Across the street, someone in a winter hat held a door for someone else and then let it close without looking back. Inside, the house took me in at the same speed it always has. I hung my coat on the second hook because the first one squeaks and I was not in the mood for it. The key Miles had returned found the small dish on the shelf by the stairs. It lay there without drama metal against ceramic quiet as a coin that has decided to rest. I stood a moment longer listening to the place that knows my weight on every board. The line on my wrist warmed to skin. In the front room, the clock moved and did not ask permission. The day finished its work without saying goodbye. The whole house breathed in then out and kept going. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.